Coming to you from the West Coast, this is a Politicoast emergency podcast. We haven't done one of these in a while. Today, we found out the Government of Canada is, and therefore I guess all of us, are buying a pipeline.
Yeah, how does it feel to own 32 millimeters of pipeline?
Is that how the math works out?
That's how the math works out. Of course, I did the math on it.
I'll be sure to claim mine very soon. I'll find a nice spot to write my name on. Yeah, the deadline was coming up on Thursday, 2 days from now. Today is May 29th, 2018. And we're recording in about 5:30 p.m., just in case anything happens right now. We're not at the protest over at Science World, though I'm sure many of my friends are. The federal government announced this morning that they'd reached a deal to put a $4.5 billion offer before Kinder Morgan to buy out the rights to the Trans Mountain Expansion Project and related pipeline and terminal assets. And in the meantime, up until that deal goes through later in August likely, they are giving just like a giant loan to Kinder Morgan to get construction going right away. So looks like the pipeline's back on.
Well, until the court challenges inevitably slow it down again.
So this deal is just in moments before Kinder Morgan's deadline, which I guess if we didn't meet, Kinder Morgan would have just given up and then we could have just bought it after. I'm sure it would have been a fire sale then. But we bought this pipeline. The federal government has also said that in addition to that loan that starts immediately and the $4.5 billion to buy it, they're basically going to be putting the money in to build this. And while Bill Morneau was very cagey about how much it would cost to build, because he says, we want to make sure that companies have a good chance to bid on it and make a competitive bid. What we know is that Kinder Morgan was saying it would cost about $7.4 billion to build this. So we're now up to $12 billion of public money for this project.
That's not a small amount of money either. We're talking...
I think that was the size of the deficit.
No, it's about the size of the promised deficit. The actual deficit is much bigger.
Well, now it's double.
It was only supposed to be a $10 billion deficit. But yeah, pretty much everyone on Twitter has pointed out what else you can buy for this. So, you could put in over 6,000 megawatts of solar panels for the same amount of money, or a whole bunch of other stuff. I think the one that's most galling to a lot of people is spend the $3.5 billion that's required to give every Canadian, including the remote First Nations communities, safe drinking water.
Which is one of those things the Liberals had promised to do.
Yes, and then you'd still have $9-ish billion left over to spend on other stuff.
But we're not going to be long-term owners of this pipeline. The Liberals aren't known to be fans of nationalization. They're not a fire sale everything, but in this case, this pipeline we're buying, as soon as they can, they're pretty much going to sell it off again.
Well, maybe. If someone comes forward and, if the market conditions are such that, it actually made sense to spend billions of dollars acquiring a pipeline in, 10 years' time when it's actually built.
And it's very vague in here. The backgrounder I'm looking at from the Government of Canada talks about at the appropriate time we'll sell it. But they do say many investors have already expressed interest in the project, including Indigenous groups, Canadian pension funds, and others. So many people want this. That's why Kinder Morgan was pretty much ready to walk away from it. The other thing I haven't actually seen covered much is that the government of Alberta actually stepped up as well, and they are promising to provide a contingency fund, an emergency fund as it were, and they might provide $0, they might provide $2 billion, and they will cover unforeseen circumstances, whatever those may be, but in return they will receive value commensurate to their contribution through equity or profit sharing. Although you can't profit share off a pipeline that doesn't get used if you sell it off.
It's not clear exactly how this works.
I could kind of see the argument long term if the government wanted to hold ownership of it and say, we will make, if it's a commercially viable project, why wouldn't we want to keep it in a public hand and actually make a duty off all of the oil flowing through it, especially if oil prices go back up or keep going up. But no, we're going to take all of the risk and get none of the benefit. There's also additional further indemnity protections. The federal government's going to continue to cover those costs caused by BC or any municipality for whoever ultimately buys it. And if there's a final judicial decision that goes against the pipeline, or if despite commercially reasonable efforts, the proponent who takes it over cannot complete the expansion by a predetermined date, the government will either just buy the pipeline back or pay off those costs, which if you can't build your damn thing, why? This one makes no sense to me. I mean, the rest are kind of like annoying and just putting money to cover commercial risks, but...
Well, it's effectively a subsidy for whoever ends up building this, in that they're subsidizing any of the risk on it. So now it's a less risky purchase if you want to get into the pipeline business.
Are there any risks left on this project for the private actors who may or may not even be involved?
After this, no. Well, I guess there's cost overruns and stuff like that. But apparently, if it gets too bad, the government will just say, oh, well, if you can't afford to finish it, we'll chip in.
Yeah.
So, no, not really. Anything left.
Well, and that brings us to the conservative talking points that were brought up today. Andrew Scheer's main pitch was pipelines got built under the conservative government. Now, he's referring to the ones, I think, that went to the US, and rather than pipelines to Tidewater. But none of those took government funding. I mean, they took subsidies and other typical handouts to the oil industry, but no massive bailouts. The only thing that's changed is Justin Trudeau, which that's also not true. We also have John Horgan now in the Greens holding him up.
And in fact, that might actually be the more salient point in why this is running into trouble, because a BC Liberal government probably wouldn't be putting up as much of the fight, and there wouldn't be as much uncertainty around this.
Well, Andrew Wilkinson is feeling like he's happy to see this go through, I guess.
Yeah, although he doesn't stop him taking shots at the BC NDP for basically the same talking point of, well, look how you guys are now making us spend a whole bunch of public money to get this thing built. When if you just gotten out of the way, we could have had someone else do it for out of their own pocket.
Well, and the federal NDP, Jagmeet Singh, has stepped up and come out from whatever publicity tour he's been on, and come out with a strong statement that actually, it doesn't mirror the Conservatives, but they both agree that spending federal money on a pretty much private enterprise doesn't tend to make a lot of sense. From Singh's point of view, this money could, like you were talking about, be better or could be spent on building solar panels and tackling environmental issues from a more sustainable way. Jagmeet actually breaks down the numbers of how much this costs per job, because this will generate about 3,000 construction jobs. I've heard the number tossed around, and long-term, a couple hundred jobs. The broader hope is the long-term economic activity it generates, that, then Alberta will have that pharmacare money. And so Jagmeet Singh is criticizing it from an environmental point of view, and saying also that you can't build pipelines and call yourself a climate leader at the same time, which has been Trudeau's attempt to balance. If we let this pipeline go through, then you can have ocean protections and a carbon tax and all these other things.
I don't know, maybe if he was like going full Norway on the whole thing, like you can make a decent argument that way. They are an oil producer and they do a lot of stuff towards environmental sustainability there. But, Canada is not Norway, and we're nowhere near their level of
public ownership.
Yeah, public ownership
or
and just
cash in the bank.
Yeah, or just tackling it in a very serious way.
Well, and Elizabeth May and the Greens had their obvious similar stance of they were never for this pipeline, and so let's be apocalyptic about how terrible this is. The best thing for May was that yesterday was her sentencing for her contempt of violating the protest orders or injunctions. So you had CBC pointing this out in the same sentence as her response, just like, and yesterday she was fined $1,500 for violating these things. And what I also love about that is that her lawyer and the special prosecutor who was going after her, they both agreed, all right, well, she'll pay $500 like Kennedy Stewart did. But then the judge said, no, she's been playing this up a lot. She has to pay $1,500 because she, quote, exploited her office for gain here, and talked about how her actions might inspire others to break the law. So she got a special slap on the wrist. Although she was adamant that what she was convicted of isn't in the criminal code. And so she was going on with the line, "I'm not a convicted criminal," which is great PR.
Yeah, it's one of those things, if you have to say it, you're losing, and it's a little hard to say with a straight face when you've just pled guilty to criminal contempt of court.
So I think that covers most of the federal politicians who are speaking out on this. Although I did see actually NDP MP Don Davies tweeted a picture of Trudeau, but with Stephen Harper's hair photoshopped over, saying, "Canada's back." And I found that funny from a partisan point of view.
But that is something interesting. Like, on October 19th of 2015, when I was watching the election results come in, I would not have predicted buying a pipeline would be something that would happen over the next couple of years. And hell, even if Stephen Harper had won re-election, I'm not sure we would have bought a pipeline. Like, this is
a big move.
Yeah, big move and kind of unexpected in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Trudeau's pretty much staked his legacy on this now, which is weird for someone who spent so much time in ads during that election, outdoors, canoeing, and otherwise pushing that environmental image. If you read his platform carefully, though, he never said he was against pipelines. He just thought they needed another review.
Yeah, in fact, he was fairly clear that he wasn't against pipelines, just they needed to do a better job. But that doesn't really indicate he was this pro-pipeline where it's, okay, we're going to spend $12 billion of taxpayer money to get one built.
And so we have the BC government's response, which John Horgan put up this morning, and it's him basically saying, it doesn't matter who owns it, I'm still suing over the jurisdictional questions, which frankly is a pretty smart position. I mean, this doesn't change the politics for him at all.
No, not at all.
Actually, it makes it maybe a touch better for him, since he can go, I'm not the one wasting $12 billion. I'm only wasting a couple million on a court case, which now it looks like pennies. It was interesting, though, when I went looking for Horgan's response on the Government of BC's website, they also had a little release about an update on the Trans Mountain permitting process, which was a very dry release. It just had numbers about the number of permits that had been submitted, processed, and that were still under review, with no real commentary attached. It's just like, here's where the permits are at. We're telling you today for no obvious reason. The obvious reason being that they want to suggest they're not going to unreasonable or illegal lengths to stop this thing. I have a couple pro-pipeline people on my Facebook. Not many, but there are a couple. And I saw some of the arguments going around that this is great because, Alberta needs the pipeline to go through. If only, the federal government would step up and uphold the law. I saw that talking point tossed a couple times around, and that always bothered me because I don't know what law has been broken so far. I mean, there was Elizabeth May and Kennedy Stewart that we talked about, but they have been charged and fined. BC is going to court, which is part of following the law and due process. Otherwise, we're just kind of shouting rhetoric. Like, most of what BC has done to slow this pipeline down is just say they don't want it.
Apparently it's enough.
Well, and I did see another argument that this is similar to the auto bailout of 2008 that Stephen Harper did. Because at that point, if the government didn't step in, you'd have all these big auto companies going under. You'd lose thousands of jobs across Ontario, maybe some in Quebec, but it would be devastating. And the government put money in to make sure those companies stayed afloat. We didn't end up owning them, though.
We did have shares of GM.
Okay.
And we did eventually offload them. And I think we made a little money on the whole thing. But the key difference, though, is this wasn't, GM wanted to build a new plant, ran into some difficulties, and we decided, let's build that new plant for you. This was, the economy was imploding. So we're going to step in. And, whether or not you think corporate bailouts are a good idea, the two scenarios are very different.
Well, yeah, there's proper economic terms for it that I'm forgetting offhand, or even philosophical, but like one has real consequences if you don't do something, or like tangible. It affects people who exist. The other is theoretical. Like, if we don't build this pipeline, theoretical jobs and theoretical economic benefits aren't realized. If we'd done nothing in the auto industry bailout, people would have lost their jobs. Now, did we do the right thing? That could still be debated. It seems like it was better than not doing it, but I'm not the economist. I'm not studying it. In this case, a potential job is not the same as an existing job. So I found the argument weak. But, the federal government is telling us that this $4.5 billion purchase price, it'll prove worth it because in the end, we'll clearly be able to sell it for at least that much. We'll have a finished pipeline to sell rather than part of one. So maybe it'll all work out in the end. Maybe Justin Trudeau will win a bunch of extra votes in Alberta for this.
It doesn't hurt his chances there, although it certainly does here. And I imagine Joyce Murray and Jody Raybird-Wilson are feeling rather uncomfortable right now.
Well, I've seen so many posters around this constituency going after Joyce Murray, asking why she supports this pipeline, why she won't stand up against it. Because when she ran for leadership, and even in the election, she was more outspoken on environmental issues because she's running in Kitsilano in Vancouver, like the hippie district. Now she's kind of just all fallen in line with everyone else at the federal level. So I don't really get even the politics of this for Justin Trudeau. I can get it for Rachel Notley.
But so he's not going to pick up any seats in Fort McMurray. It's like in the actual oil patch itself, it's not going to pick up any seats. So that's deep blue country. And, let's couple seats in Calgary, maybe 1 or 2 in Edmonton.
Hold on to his 2 in Edmonton.
Are 2 of those even still technically Liberal seats anymore? Or they've had at least 1 member, I think, removed from caucus.
They had 1, 2. Maybe they could get.
But it's going to be hard to drastically grow the Liberals' seat count in Alberta. Even under the best of circumstances, they'll need an election or 2 to pick up some more urban ridings there. And most of the province is going to vote Conservative. It might be 20 Conservative seats, and the rest split between the NDP and the Liberals. But it's not going red. Whereas BC, good chance you've lost a bunch of your lower mainland seats with this.
Well, and the thing with the Liberals trying to out-pro-pipeline the Conservatives is the people who really like pipelines just go with the Conservatives. And this is the problem the Alberta NDP is going to run into, unless they can convince Albertans that Jason Kenney has a bunch of bananas candidates running around, which will
They'll
happen.
probably be able to do.
But so often you find political parties in Canada try to mimic it tends to go to the right. No one ever pretends to be more left. I guess Kathleen Wynne. Yeah, said it at the same time. But for the most part, parties pretend to be more right and then fail to deliver on it, but also don't get the votes for it. Like right-wing voters will just vote for a right-wing party. They won't vote for a Liberal party that's pretending to be a Conservative party. NDP voters will vote for a Liberal party pretending to be a left-wing party.
Kind of.
Sometimes.
Only to keep the Conservatives out.
Yeah. But just the political math for Trudeau here just doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, and it would be one thing if he just kind of backstopped the pipeline or something, or just did the declared in the national interest thing and shifted a whole bunch of regulations around that or something. That alone would be a tough political move to make. But spending billions of dollars on something, people notice when the figure starts with a B. It's a big deal to do this, and I can't see this really working out very well for him at all. So interestingly enough, this whole thing is happening on the 1-year anniversary of the Confidence and Supply Agreement that the BC Greens and the NDP signed, which, among other things, I believe included Kinder Morgan.
The Confidence and Supply Agreement, as far as I can remember it, and I did read it a couple weeks ago again, but not today, it said the BC government would do everything in its toolkit, or use all the tools in the toolkit, and that's where the phrase first came from, to stop it. So this means it's not dead this week as it looked possible, and I actually thought likely, but BC is still doing, as far as I can tell, everything it can. I saw some trolls on Twitter trying to suggest this is Andrew Weaver's moment to see if he's actually means he's behind stopping this pipeline, but I'm like, what more do you want the BC government to do? They filed a constitutional reference question. They aren't going to illegally hold up permits, or, they'll get smacked down and just waste money and also ruin their other cases.
Yeah, short of having John Horgan stand in front of excavators, there isn't much more you can do.
Well, and they already had Kennedy Stewart do it. I mean, he's not, I guess he's technically a BC NDP member because he's a federal NDP member.
NDP is weird that way.
I guess the only other thing to look at is in Alberta, and As I mentioned, Alberta's on the hook for $2 billion, and Rachel Notley staked her political career on this. She is super excited to hear about this deal since her name is on the dotted line. There aren't a ton of details about their $2 billion pledge backstop, other than Notley is saying to the Calgary Herald that they'll only pay it once the pipeline is done and oil is flowing. And Jason Kenney is grumpy that federal taxpayer money is having to be handed out. He's calling it a huge taxpayer bailout. But, he's happy for the opposition to conditionally support the pledge. He says it's basically the last option. And if it weren't for this, we'd be clearly having Kinder Morgan pulling out. So he's kind of always stuck on this question of saying Rachel Notley should be doing more. And then when she does more, he goes, she should have done something more than that more.
Yeah, but he still didn't get the core of the pro-pipeline vote anyway, so doesn't really matter too much.
Well, I'm sure things will continue to develop on this front over the next week as they've continued to do, but I don't know, maybe the pipeline will quiet down for a couple weeks. We'll have a full episode coming out at the end of this week. We'll record on Friday afternoon and hopefully talk about proportional representation referendums and have an update on the Ontario election.
Yes, I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in August when the deal is apparently going to be signed.
And whenever the court date happens and whenever more protesters happen, and we're never going to get done with this goddamn pipeline.
Nope. And of course, this led to a few best of BC Poly moments. So first up is David Mostrop, former guest of the show. He tweeted, by age 35, you should own 1/36 millionth of a pipeline. And of course, if you haven't been hanging around Twitter, that's a reference to a series of tweets about what you should have invested by age 35, which is apparently had gone viral a couple weeks back. You can follow him at David_Mostrop.
Well, and another was past guest of Cambie Report, Jen St. Dennis, who tweeted, this pipeline purchase reminds me of that time in 1983 when my dad bought a color TV without checking with my mom first. And you can follow Jen St. Dennis at Jen St. Den. And Quinn McDonald drew our attention to the parody account at BC Ferries, FERRYS, who tweeted, attention passengers on the outer decks. The ship's whistle is about to play All My Taxes Live in Texas, in reference to where Kinder Morgan is based, if you need the joke explained to you.
And that has been our Politicos Emergency Podcast. Find links to the stories we mentioned in the show notes at politicos.ca. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at PolitosPod. Leave us a review and let us know what you think. Support the show and get early access to our interviews at patreon.com/Politos. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Thanks for listening.